Bears fans, I hope you're sitting down for this one because we've got 3 massive stories rolled into one video today, and every single one of them is going to have you talking. What's going on, everybody? Fave here, back with Faves, and today is one of those jam-packed days where I don't even know where to start because there's just so much happening around this organization right now. We've got a fresh trade proposal that could bring a $76 million pass rusher to Chicago. We've got a stadium situation in Indiana that is way messier than anybody in that Hammond press conference wants you to believe. And we've got a young receiver quietly putting up a statistic that has him mentioned in the same breath as some of the best wide receivers in this entire league. So buckle up because we are covering all of it, start to finish, no filler. Just the truth as best as anybody outside these front offices actually knows it right now. Let's kick things off with the story that's got my phone blowing up all morning because this is exactly the kind of rumor that keeps me up writing scripts at 1 in the morning. A new 3-team trade proposal has surfaced from a well-known NFL analyst over at Bleacher Report, and the framework here is wild. The Chicago Bears would land Arizona Cardinals pass rusher Josh Sweat. The Carolina Panthers would take tight end Cole Kmet off Chicago's hands, and the Arizona Cardinals would walk away with 2 future 4th-round picks, 1 coming from the Bears, 1 coming from the Panthers. 3 teams, 3 very different motivations, and honestly, once you break it down piece by piece, it starts to make a strange kind of sense for everybody involved. Let's talk about Josh Sweat first, because if you don't know his story yet, you need to. This man signed a 4-year deal worth over $76 million with Arizona in free agency, fresh off winning a championship in Philadelphia. And get this, his very first season in the desert wasn't some disappointing adjustment period. It was the best year of his entire career. Double-digit sacks, a career high in tackles for loss, a career high in quarterback hits, multiple forced fumbles. At 29 years old, this man is producing like he's still climbing, not declining. And yet, despite coming off arguably his finest season as a pro, he didn't show up for voluntary offseason work this spring. That's the kind of red flag that gets an entire fan base asking questions immediately. Here's why I don't think that absence is some big mystery. Arizona is, and I'm going to say this bluntly because it needs to be said bluntly, an organizational mess right now. They finished last season with a brutal 3-win, 14-loss record. They fired their head coach back in January, and here's the part that really matters. That's the exact same coach Sweat had reunited with when he originally signed with the Cardinals, because that coach had been his defensive coordinator back in Philadelphia. Sweat didn't just sign a contract in Arizona. He signed up to play for a specific guy, a guy he trusted, a guy he had history with. And 4 months later, that guy was gone. On top of all that, there's 0 guaranteed money remaining on Sweat's deal beyond this current season. 0. He's sitting in year 2 of a 4-year contract with no long-term financial security. Playing for a franchise that just demonstrated it doesn't have much patience or direction right now. If I'm Josh Sweat, I'm not exactly racing to show up for voluntary practices in that kind of environment either. Now let's flip to Chicago's side of things, because the need here is not up for debate. This defense finished near the very bottom of the league last season in quick pressures and pass rush win rate. That's a real, measurable problem. But here's the part that should genuinely worry Bears fans more than anything else. That same defense actually led the entire league in takeaways and turnover differential. On the surface, that sounds great, right? Leading the league in something is usually a good thing. But any honest football analyst has to tell you the truth here. That kind of takeaway production tends to regress hard the following season. I'm not saying this defense is about to collapse. I'm saying they were riding a wave of turnover luck that historically does not repeat itself at the same rate. And the only real way to insulate yourself from that kind of regression is to build a pass rush that creates pressure on its own consistently, snap after snap, instead of hoping the other team keeps handing you the ball. Now, does Chicago have young talent on the edge already? Sure, they do. Austin Booker is currently penciled in to start opposite Montez Sweat, but he missed 7 games last year with a preseason injury. Adetomiwa Adebawore is working his way back from an Achilles injury. Shamar Turner, last year's second-round pick, is recovering from a torn ankle. All 3 of those guys could genuinely be ready for week 1. Could be. But fam, Could be ready is not a plan. That's a hope. And championship caliber teams do not build their pass rush strategy around a stack of medical recovery timelines. That's exactly why this front office should be taking this Sweat conversation seriously. Now let's get into the part of this trade that almost nobody is talking about correctly, and that's Cole Kmet's role in all of this. The easy, lazy narrative going around is simple. The Bears drafted Colston Loveland 10th overall last year, then added another tight end this year. So obviously Kmet is expendable. And yes, that depth chart logic is real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But there's a number buried in this contract situation that completely changes how you should think about the financial math here. Back in April, before the draft even happened, the Bears restructured Kmet's contract, converting a big chunk of his salary into a signing bonus, which dropped his cap number for this season significantly. Sounds great on the surface, right? Except that move pushed a massive chunk of money onto his final contract year instead. And here's the number that actually matters if you're trying to understand why this trade would even make sense for Chicago. If the Bears traded or released Kmet this year, according to salary cap tracking sites, they would only save a couple $1,000,000 in real cap space while eating a significant amount in dead money spread across the next 2 seasons. Read that again. A couple $1,000,000 in actual savings. That is not freeing up meaningful cap space to go sign or trade for an elite pass rusher. That's basically pocket change in the grand scheme of an NFL roster. So if the money barely moves the needle, why would Ryan Poles even consider a move like this? It's not about 2026 cap space. It's about role, and it's about 2027. Kmet is simply no longer a featured piece of this passing game. Last season, he finished with his lowest catch total since his rookie year, while the rookie tight end taken later in the draft actually led the entire Bears roster in receptions. The first rookie tight end to lead this franchise in catches since the Mike Ditka era, and that is not some minor footnote, fam. That is real franchise history being written right in front of us. On top of that, this front office also drafted a big physical blocking tight end this year who's going to eat into a lot of the heavy personnel snaps that used to belong to Kmet. Now, Ryan Poles addressed this directly in his post-draft press conference, saying his feelings toward Kmet haven't changed, that the Bears remain one of the most run-heavy, tight end-friendly teams in the league in terms of personnel usage, and that nothing changes for Kmet specifically. And look, I actually believe Poles here. I don't think he's lying. But let's be honest with each other for a second. In this league, my feelings haven't changed, and we're trading him in a few months are not mutually exclusive sentences. General managers say nice things about players publicly all the time, right up until the moment those same players get traded. My honest read on this specific proposal as it currently stands: it's a little light for Chicago if you're looking at pure market value. Josh Sweat, a guy coming off 12 sacks with no guaranteed money left on his deal, is worth more on the open market than a reduced role tight end plus a low-value future pick heading to Arizona. If I'm running this front office, I'm pushing Arizona to either eat part of that remaining salary or I'm trying to knock that outgoing pick down a full round. That said, and this might be the most important part of this entire breakdown, the real winner in this 3-team scenario isn't Arizona at all. It's Carolina. The Panthers haven't had a tight end crack 500 receiving yards in a season since Greg Olsen was doing it for them years ago. Last season, their entire tight end room combined for barely over 600 yards total. Kmet, a guy who's posted seasons over 700 yards himself, would immediately solve one of the most obvious holes on that entire roster. So is this trade happening this month? My prediction, and I want to be crystal clear here, this is a prediction, not some confirmed inside report. No, I don't think so. I think this realistically gets closer to the October trade deadline if Sweat continues to be unhappy in Arizona and that front office finally accepts they need to start selling off assets before the value on a contract with no remaining guarantees completely evaporates. By then, we'll also have a much clearer picture of whether Loveland has fully taken over as a passing game weapon and whether that new blocking tight end is genuinely eating into Kmet's snaps in the run game. If both of those things happen the way people expect, the internal case for trading Kmet becomes a whole lot easier to make, even if the actual cap savings stay minimal. All right, let's shift gears completely because we need to talk about this stadium situation. And Fam, I promise you it is way messier than some people want you to believe. We already know how the first half of this story goes. Illinois had its opportunity. The state legislature in Springfield couldn't get the financing mechanism passed that the Bears needed to make an Arlington Heights stadium happen, and the franchises board formally voted to move forward with Hammond, Indiana instead. We covered that weeks ago. That chapter is closed. But what's happening right now in Indiana is the part almost nobody is explaining correctly. Let's start with the most recent development. Just this past weekend, drilling equipment showed back up in Hammond, except this time on a completely different plot of land near Wolf Lake Terminals, west of the interstate, a different location entirely from the original site everybody had been focused on up to this point. Team officials confirm this is simply part of the normal evaluation process as they continue advancing the project. Translation: in plain English, the Bears still do not have a final site locked in. They still do not have a construction timeline, and they've spent months now letting everybody believe Indiana was basically a done deal. I think it's important to say this as bluntly as possible. Choosing a region is not the same thing as choosing a specific plot of land. And choosing a plot of land is not the same thing as having the financing fully locked in and guaranteed. And that's exactly where this story gets genuinely interesting, because Indiana's incentive package, the one approved by the state legislature and signed into law by the governor back in late February, depends on a combination of new local taxes across 2 counties, plus an undetermined share of a massive fund tied to the Indiana Toll Roads private operator. We're talking over $1 billion total in public money earmarked for infrastructure around this stadium. And here's the problem almost nobody is covering with the seriousness it deserves. One of those 2 counties does not want to pay. A county commissioner over in Porter County put it about as bluntly as you possibly can, saying he sees basically no appetite in his county to impose a new restaurant tax and send that money over to the neighboring county to help finance a stadium that isn't even being built anywhere near their residents. He went as far as saying there's a negligible percentage of people in his county who would actually support creating that tax just to mail the proceeds off to Hammond. That's about as honest and blunt as a local official can get, and I think it captures exactly the tension that's going to define the next several months of this entire negotiation. Now, is this some existential threat to the whole stadium project? Honestly, I don't think it is, and this is where I'll gently push back on some of the panic I've seen floating around online. According to the legislative analysis behind this incentive package, that specific county's tax contribution represents less than 10% of the total projected annual stadium-related tax revenue. It's a real fight, but it's not the piece holding up the entire financial structure by itself. The governor, when asked directly about this pushback, said it doesn't trouble him much and that he expects most people to come around once the project gets closer to breaking ground. And the mayor of Hammond himself was even more direct about it, essentially saying there are going to be people in that resistant county working at the stadium once it's built, and that a decade from now, once Caleb Williams is possibly living in that area, people's attitudes are going to shift. But there's another layer of friction here that I actually think is more serious than the tax dispute, and it's about the land itself. The mayor of Arlington Heights, the Chicago suburb that lost out on the stadium fight, went public a few weeks back warning about hazardous waste concerns in Hammond, saying he's worked around enough old gas station and dry cleaning sites in his career to know that kind of soil contamination can be a real problem and that he'd personally be very concerned about building on a site like that. Now, you have to read that statement with 2 things in mind at the same time. First, it's genuinely legitimate technical information, because building on contaminated industrial soil really does carry environmental remediation costs that can spiral into enormous, unpredictable numbers. Second, that statement is coming from a guy whose own city lost the stadium fight to Hammond, so it is absolutely not some neutral, disinterested analysis. The Hammond mayor actually responded to that criticism pretty smartly, saying he understands people wanting to take a close look at the land, but pointing out that the Bears organization knows far more about the environmental situation in that corridor than any outside official does, because they're spending real money right now evaluating it in detail. And honestly, he's got a point there. If the Bears are out there testing multiple different sites with drilling crews and soil analysis and remediation assessments, that's not random indecision. That's a methodical organization taking a real documented risk in that industrial area seriously. My honest read on the whole situation: Illinois already lost this fight. We all knew that weeks ago. That part isn't changing. But this idea that Indiana has everything completely figured out and is just sitting around waiting on a final signature, that's more political marketing than it is reality. You've got two counties fighting over who pays what tax. You've got legitimate, still unresolved environmental concerns on the actual land. And you've got the Bears organization still out there hunting for new plots of ground in the middle of summer. This is going to get resolved eventually. I have no doubt about that, but it is not going to be nearly as clean or as fast as some of these Indiana officials want everybody to believe. And for Chicago fans, the bottom line stays exactly the same as it's been for weeks now. The zip code is probably changing, but the team, the history, and the legacy of this franchise are not going anywhere. All right, let's end today on something that genuinely puts a smile on my face, because we need to talk about Luther Burden III. And fam, this stat is not a joke.